All right, so we're going to talk about the Great Depression and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And but before we get there, I just wanted to talk about a few things that Hoover did to try to deal with the Depression. Okay, and something that you want to understand again is that Hoover believed in laissez-faire economics, and so he believed that the government should be limited in its response or in its dealings with the economy. Okay, and again, I mean this is a lot of the debate to even today is about this very thing. How much should the government get involved in the economy? Everybody agrees that obviously the government has a place, um, but just how much? And that's really one of the biggest differences between Democrats and Republicans. Even though people get all huffy and get all mad at each other, it's really just about trying to find that balance. And people, like I said in the last lecture, they just need to chill sometimes. Okay? So it's good to be informed. Everybody should be informed. For example, what I do is watch a lot of C-SPAN. I do not take seriously MSNBC or Fox News or even CNN. I mean, this is like professional wrestling. If you want to watch it for entertainment, that's one thing, but it's not news. Okay? So it's good to stay informed. It's good to voice your opinion. But again, you just have to realize that there are a lot of people that just get all upset and mad at each other, and they really shouldn't, in my opinion. Okay, y'all could disagree with me. That's cool. What are some things that Hoover did in order to do something about the economy, about the Depression? Well, again, he was a believer in this idea of rugged individualism. All right, and that people should be left alone to struggle and to make it themselves. And of course, I think that a lot of people still believe in aspects of this. I mean, this is one of the things that America's sort of known for. Again, it's just a matter of how much. Hoover believed that the government getting too involved was socialistic, which I disagree with. Socialism is when the government owns the means of production. In other words, the government owns all businesses. Just because the government sometimes gets involved in the economy does not necessarily mean it's socialist, even though you hear that sometimes. There are some things that are, I guess, socialistic in a way. I mean, you can say like public schools, the fire department, the police department. Okay, public roads. This is where we put all our money in to make something, to create something. All right, and it's owned, you could say by the government or in a democratic system owned by the people. The government is simply a representative of the people. But some people, and Hoover was one of them, that kind of believed that that this was a slippery slope. Let me cut, like I said, I like to cut Hoover some slack here. And it was a slippery slope because once the government starts getting involved, then it may quickly, move to this idea of socialism or whatever. So he was very careful about that. Um, but again, Hoover made some mistakes. One of the things I'll talk about two mistakes I guess that he made. You could say overall he just didn't do enough. Okay, let's just say that. And I think most historians would agree with that. Although you would find some that say that if Roosevelt hadn't been elected and Hoover would have continued, maybe we'd have got out of the Depression faster. I don't know. That's a minority of people that say that, but who knows? One of the mistakes that he made, that at least most historians agree that was that it was a mistake, was maintaining the gold standard. And you find some people today that think we need to go back to the gold standard. And what the gold standard is that for every dollar that you have, that dollar represents gold. All right, instead of just throwing around gold as a currency, the dollar represents gold. It's called a gold standard. So people like Ron Paul, for example, thinks that we should go back to the gold standard. And we got kind of rid of the gold standard early 1970s during the Nixon administration. But at this time, a lot of other countries abandoned the gold standard in order to try to get out of the Depression by inflationary policies. Okay. And if you get rid of the gold standard, then you can just kind of print money. Okay. And so again, it's a balance. If you do too much, it's really bad for the economy. But some people argue that some inflationary policies can be good, especially in a depression, because a depression is kind of like the opposite of inflation. Again, I'm not an economics teacher. Okay, so if you take economics later on, actually we do offer it at Sewella. If you take it at McNeese or another university, then you can learn maybe more about this. Something else that he made a mistake on was the Smoot-Hawley tariff. Signed this into law, and it was the largest peacetime tariff in American history. It raised the average duty on goods from 38.5% to nearly 60%. And this was, and most historians agree, a big mistake. Why? Well, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I kind of want you to understand the effects of Hoover's response to the Depression, especially the tariff and the gold standard. It lengthened, in my opinion, it lengthened and worsened the Depression. But again, some people may disagree with that. Now, the tariff included agricultural goods, which hurt farmers more than it helped them because most of their market was foreign. Now listen to this carefully, if foreigners could not sell their goods in the United States, all right, so basically when you raise a tariff, okay, from 30-something% to 60-something%, people are not going to buy that good because that tax is going to be added onto the price, and they're just not going to be able to sell anything. So when the Europeans could not sell their goods, then they couldn't buy our goods. Okay. The tariff increased prices for American consumers, further reducing consumption which angered foreign governments who retaliated by placing their own tariffs on goods. This is a bad idea. Okay. So by the end of 1931, 25 nations had raised tariff walls against American products, and this all devastated already weak economies of the industrialized world. Something that you should remember sometimes is that our society, and I don't want to get all philosophical, okay? Well, I'm get a little philosophical here, but our society is something that's kind of constructed. It's kind of made up in some weird way. It's almost fiction in a sense. I mean, when we look at money, for example, like we have kind of created this economy, and it's not such a bad thing because we've created an economy, a system, so that we do have the opportunities to do more than just be a subsistence farmer that many of our great or great-great-grandparents were, if actually they were lucky. Some people were, sharecroppers. They didn't even have their own farm. And so I think it's not such a bad thing. You just have to remember that anything that can be constructed can also be destroyed fairly easily. So you just want to remember, I think it's important to look at our society from a historical perspective and understand that in many ways it's kind of constructed. It's kind of made up. And probably something that's more real is if we were to all kind of go back to farming and that type of thing. I don't really want to do that because I don't like hauling watermelons and stuff. But some people like that. Some people feel that need to kind of go back to nature and that kind of thing because it's more real. Now, I've finished philosophizing there. Let's get back to some history. The trade wars helped cause World War II, believe it or not. And this raising of tariffs and all that is kind of known as a trade war. And this is very important. This is actually something I may end with just because I want you to remember this. The Depression helped give rise to Hitler. In fact, when people are desperate, all right, when it comes to the economy, when people are desperate, they tend to go to extremes politically. They're going to be way to the left or way to the right. Okay? And Hitler, what you could say, is way to the right. In fact, the way we often look at politics is one that's just kind of linear, like this. You have people on the left, people on the right, and most of us are actually in the middle, even though some people think, okay, if you're a Republican, you're going to be about right here. Okay, this is Republicans. If you're a Democrat, you're going to be over here. If you are, I guess, way to the left, you can consider yourself a communist or a radical. Okay, someone that wants a revolution and to change everything right now. If you're to the right, you're conservative, but you can be so conservative that you're actually reactionary. And what reactionary means in this case is that you actually want to go back in time. Not only do you want things not to go and let me just scratch this out. I wouldn't consider somebody on the far right conservative. Okay, so let me put conservative, over here. So that really would not be accurate. Somebody that's conservative simply means, all that means is that you won't change. Change needs to happen slowly, and you want to be fiscally responsible, that type of thing. You don't want the government to get too involved in the economy, pro-business, that type of thing. So that wouldn't be accurate. But someone that's reactionary, even fascist, and what this means is that everyone would be subservient to the state. It's a very efficient, nationalistic, one-party government. And what's interesting is if you know anything about communism, an example of a 20th century communism would be a communist would be Stalin, even though I wouldn't consider him an example of really Marxist communism, but that's a different story. And an example of an extreme right-wing person or fascist would be Hitler. Hitler was the leader in Germany when Germany was responsible for the Holocaust, and Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union, and his Communist Party killed millions of people. And you realize that these guys were really, even though they're on opposite ends of the spectrum here, not that far apart. And the reason is because that's not a good model to use. A better model to use when you talk about politics is something like this. It kind of goes in a circle. And you could be so far right and so far left that you're actually not that far from each other, because the two things that these people have in common is that they are extremist. Okay, they are extreme in their political ideologies. Okay, and so the fact that they're extreme, they think that they are right, everybody else is wrong, and so they tend to enforce and impose through force their ideas on everyone else. Okay, but let's end there, because then we're going to move towards Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration, and then we'll get to the causes of World War II.